Hello everyone, welcome back to another video. In this video we are going to be learning about pod security standards. So what is a pod security standard? The pod security standards define three different policies to broadly cover the security spectrum. These policies are cumulative and range from highly permissive to highly restrictive. This guide outlines the requirements of each policy. So we have three different types of profiles, which is privileged, baseline and restricted. So if you want, you can go through this documentation in detail, but for now what I'll do is I'll just open my GitHub repository where I've just summarized it, and so that it's easy for you to understand. So this is my EKS course repositories, and I'll go to security section because that's what we are doing right now, and then I'll just open this folder called PSS. Alright, so a pod security standards are a set of predefined security policies in Kubernetes that define how restricted a pod can be in terms of security settings. They were introduced to replace pod security policy. So I'll tell you in brief what it actually is. A pod security standards basically tells what level of access does a running pod have to an underlying infrastructure or the underlying nodes on which it is running. We have three different types. One is privileged, other one is baseline, and the last one is restricted. So let's start from the very first one, which is privileged PSS. Privilege, which is very less restrictive. It allows almost everything. It's for system level workloads. It can run as root and can use host networking, host PID, host path, etc. The use cases are as follows. It's used for CNI plugins, CSI drivers, and node level agents. So basically all the pods which are running in the Kubernetes namespace, the kube system namespace, or the pods which are running in the control plane are the one who use this privileged PSS. So let's just try this on our running EKS cluster. So if you're following this series, you will know that I already have a cluster created, which was created using the CloudFormation template. Now what I'll do is I'll just go to my EC2 instance where I have kubectl already installed, and then I'll connect to my EKS cluster from there. Alright, I'll switch to root user, and then I'll just run a command to connect to my EKS cluster, which is AWS EKS update config, and the region in my case is AP South 1, and the name of the cluster is prod. Alright, it says the entry has been added in the kubectl file. Now I'll just add an alias to make my life easier. Alright, let's just run the command and see if we are connected to the cluster. Yes, we are connected to the cluster, and right now we have two nodes running in this cluster. So let's start by applying a pod with this privileged PSS policy. Okay, so let's just copy this content from here. It's nothing that we are just using an nginx image, and for this we, like, by default all the namespaces allow the privileged pods. Okay, so you don't have to mess with the namespace for now. So what I'll do is I'll just create a file called deployment1.yaml, and I'll paste it here. Nothing crazy till now, just apply the file. Alright, so it says the privilege demo is created. Let's just check. Kubectl get pods, and it's in container creating state. Just give it a second and it will be in running state for now. Alright, so now our pod is running. So you saw that there was nothing serious about it. We ran, we did not face any challenges, any warnings, nothing, because by default it allows all the pods to run. Okay, now what we'll do is I will just exec into this pod, and I'll show you what are the level of access that we can do by a pod which is running in the privileged pod security standard. Okay, so I'll just copy this pod name, and I'll do kubectl exec it the pod name, and then I'll just exec this pod. And if I run the command id now, you will see that right now the pod, all the processes which are inside this pod are running as the root user. Okay, it means we can access a lot of stuff from this node. Now I'll just exit out of this pod, and I'll try delete this pod. Okay, so our pod is deleted. Now what we'll do is we'll try the restrictive pod security standard. Okay, and how, oh no, my bad, we'll be going with baseline PSS first. So for this, let's just read about it first. Prevents common privilege escalation, no host ID or host PC restricted host path usage, no dangerous Linux capabilities, no privileged containers, may still run at root, as root. Okay, so now to apply this baseline, what you have to do is you have to first annotate your namespace. And how you do that? Just run this command. Okay, so if you saw, I'm just running all my pods in the default namespace for now, and that's the namespace that I'll annotate now. Okay, so the namespace default is labeled. Let's just check kubectl get namespace default. If you see the labels, you will see that right now this baseline pod security standard is applied here. Now what I'll do is I'll again try to create a pod now. Okay, so just copy the content from here. Okay, you can just run the same pod because the pod that we created earlier was running as root. So I'll just apply the file again, and right now you'll see something different. You'll see a warning here which says pod security baseline latest privileged container and Nginx must not set security context privilege is equals to true, and then it says deployment.apps privilege demo created. Okay, so if you see kubectl get pods, there will be no pods running here. As you can see, there are no pods running, but still the deployment is created because these pod security standards, they work at the pod level, not at the deployment level. So the deployment will be allowed to be created, but the pod won't spin up. So if I check the deployment, you see that the deployment was created successfully, but no pods are running. And to see the warnings, you can just do kubectl get replica sets, and you see this is the replica set. Now what I'll do is I'll just describe this replica set. So just run kubectl describe replica set, and you'll see all the warnings here. Okay, Nginx must not be set as security context or privilege true. So these are the same warnings that we got earlier. Now what I'll do is I'll just delete this replica set and this deployment altogether. Kubectl delete -app and the file name. Okay, so the deployment is deleted now. Now what we'll do is we'll try the most restrictive one, which is the restrictive PSS. So this is the one. So here are the rules that you must follow if you're trying to create a pod with restricted PSS. Must use SecOmp, limited volume types, no privileged containers, no privilege escalation, must not run as root, and use cases are production workloads for the multi-tenant clusters where different applications are all running in the same cluster. Okay, so now what we'll do is I'll just label my namespace with this new label. Okay, so the namespace is labeled. Just check it using kubectl get namespace -o YAML, and you'll see that now we have a new label here which is of type restricted. So I'll just clear it, and now I'll try to create a new file. Okay, we can run the same file. Okay, that's no problem. So just try kubectl apply f, and you'll see a lot of warnings now. So if you see would violate pod security restricted latest privileged container, and Linux must not set security context or privilege true, allow privilege escalation is not equals to false, container and Linux must set security context or allow privilege escalation is equals to false. So you'll get a lot of warnings when you're trying to create a pod in the restricted PSS standards. Okay, so now what I'll do is I'll just rectify all these mistakes. I'll just take all these warnings as suggestions, and I'll try to create a new pod, okay, with all these values enabled or disabled. I'll head over to my GitHub repository, and now I'll copy this new file here. Let's name it deployment2.yaml, and I'll paste it here. Alright, I'll just walk you through this file. So if you see here, we are using a new image which is Bitnami Nginx, because by default Nginx runs as root user, which is not allowed in the restricted PSS standards. And if you see other values here, run as non-root is true, which means this pod is not going to run as root. Then allow privilege escalation is set to false, and Linux capabilities are dropped. So I'll just exit out of this file, and I'll apply this file now. Alright, so it says the deployment is created and we did not get any warnings. So I'll just check the pod. So if you see, one of the pod is running now, it is the safe Nginx. So I'll just exit into this pod. and if I write PID or the ID, you'll see that it's not running as root now. Okay, and all the warnings are also gone. So this is how you work with pod security standards. So yeah, that's pretty much in this video. I hope you learned something from it. I'll see you in the next one.